Book TV is on the campus of Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, where we're talking with professors and scholars about some of their books. And now joining us here is Deborah Hicks. Her book, The Road Out, A Teacher's Odyssey in Poor America. Deborah Hicks, what do you do here at Duke, first of all?
I have a couple of things that I do. I am part of a research unit called Social Science Research Institute, and that is a unit that is composed of people who are doing research in the social sciences in different disciplines, and so I do a lot of research. And then I'm also a social entrepreneur, so I direct a nonprofit in the North Carolina mountains called PAGE, Partnership for Appalachian Girls Education. And there I work with Appalachian girls in middle school and help them get educational opportunity and access. So I have a couple of different hats that I wear at Duke University, a researcher and now a social entrepreneur.
Social entrepreneur, is that a new term?
I think it was coined by people like Nicholas Kristof, but it's a very widely used term now for people like me who basically direct nonprofits and do different things in the nonprofit sector.
How did you get involved with Appalachian girls in middle school in Western North Carolina?
That is a long story that I write about in The Road Out, but it really begins with my own history. I grew up as an Appalachian girl. I grew up as a working class girl in a tiny little mill town in the mountains of North Carolina, and I was the first in my family to go to college, which was a very big step for me. And ended up through a scholarship from a group called AAUW, ended up getting a scholarship, going to college, and doing super well in college, and ended up finally, after a lot of stumbles and a lot of falls, going on, getting a graduate degree from Harvard in education. And from that long journey that I experienced myself, came back to my native soil, which is North Carolina, and founded this nonprofit called PAGE, and began working with Appalachian girls out here.
And when you say you work with Appalachian girls, what do you do?
I teach. So we, the people who work with me on this nonprofit, have created this. It's kind of an out-of-school sort of opportunities for girls living in the most rural and remote parts of the Appalachian Mountains. They come to an intensive summer program. They have weekly meetings with volunteers and a VISTA person working with us in PAGE. And we offer these Appalachian girls who otherwise don't have opportunities for summer learning and enrichment. We offer them a really intensive, wonderful educational program in the summer. They come into our program from all over the mountains of North Carolina and Madison County, and they do digital literacy learning, they write, they read literature, and they get a really intensive summer learning experience through PAGE, the nonprofit that I direct.
In The Road Out, who are Adriana, Blair, Maria, or Mariah, Elizabeth, Shannon, Jessica, and Alicia?
So these are 7 very amazing, very special girls that I got to know when I was teaching in Cincinnati. So I mentioned that I had gotten my college degree, my graduate degree. I ended up getting a teaching job in Cincinnati, Ohio. And there I discovered this pretty amazing neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of Appalachian people in the inner city. And it sort of goes back to part of America's history when you had people in the Appalachian region moving up north to look for jobs in cities like Cincinnati and Dayton and Akron and those kinds of cities. So I was teaching at the University of Cincinnati and found out that there was this Appalachian community, and went there and said to the people at the public elementary school in this community, it's called Lower Price Hill, would you all let me be a teacher in your elementary school and teach kids, which my degree was in education and stuff. So I began teaching and got to know these 7 girls, Blair, Mariah, and so forth. And at that time, when I first met my students, they were only in 2nd grade. I followed these girls into 3rd grade and 4th grade, and midway through their 4th grade year, I said to these young girls, do you all want to have a class of your own? And they said, yeah, we'll give this a try. So I began meeting with these girls, 7 of them all in total. We met every week and during the summer for 4 years of their lives. And this became a kind of amazing experience for them and for me. Having a room of our own, a class of our own, where we studied and read literature, talked about stories, and mostly I listened to the girls' dreams about their lives, and it was a place where they could dream and tell stories and read books.
Deborah Hicks, how are these 7 girls similar in their outlook of life?
They are poor, so they are among the very poorest of American children. I found out, I left Cincinnati in 2009, came back to North Carolina, as I said, to found my nonprofit, but as I was later to learn, Cincinnati in 2010 became the 3rd worst city in the United States for child poverty in urban areas. Only 3rd to Detroit and I think Cleveland. So this was one of the poorest cities in the U.S. for child poverty. And part of that child poverty was Appalachian poverty in the inner city. So all these girls were poor. Many of them had moms who had some drug issues. And in poor white America, the drug problem tends to be centered around the abuse of kind of prescription painkillers, like OxyContin would be an example of that. So I found out that many of my young students, some of them like 8, 9, 10 years old, had moms who were doing drugs, and that was a common factor among the girls.
And so how did that affect their outlook on life? Their dreams, as you say.
Yeah, well, I think that for many of these girls, they were, what I was to discover as a teacher was for many of these girls, they were essentially orphans. They had become orphans to OxyContin and to American poverty. And so I was their teacher. We had our own class, but our class became like a family to them. And they became kind of like sisters. And yes, I was a teacher. I sometimes had to be, teacherly and stern and stuff, but it became like family. It was very intimate. At one point, 2 of the girls, and one of them was Blair, and the other one was Adriana. They put their arms around one another and said, "We're sisters, we're sisters." And I said to them, and we often began our class with a snack and kind of food to get things kind of going and stuff. And I said to the 2 girls, "What makes y'all sisters? What's going on?" And they said, "We just figured out that both of our moms are out on the street doing drugs." And so for them, it was like we had become like this family. And the class was their sisterhood. It was a sisterhood of girls.
Did their childhood, what you were seeing in your classroom in Cincinnati, did it reflect what you grew up with in Western North Carolina?
A little bit, to some extent, yeah. So I grew up, I was a working class girl. I didn't have opportunity, didn't have access. No one in my family had been to college, and I was very naive about how college worked and how school worked. But the difference was I was working class. My dad had a job, and he,
Did he live with the family too?
He did.
Was that rare?
I think it was pretty common in those days, and I think in rural Appalachia, as opposed to inner city, like urban Appalachian communities, you do tend to have sort of families where you have a dad and mom living in the house. And my dad was living in the household, had a job, and that was different because the girls that I taught in Cincinnati, largely their dads were out of the picture. They had biological dads, obviously, but they were just not part of their everyday lives. And their moms were starting to lose it because of the drug issue, and so their families were just beginning to be ripped apart. And what I saw in this Appalachian community in Cincinnati is similar to what you see in other urban families, that the grandmas kind of step in and start taking over and taking control of the family. In fact, one of my students I read about in The Road Out, Blair, her grandma was her central caretaker, and that was pretty common.
How did you get out? How did you get to college?
The one key word is education, and I have to be very grateful for, I was as I mentioned, a very naive working class girl. I was